here from Mariaville? Did anybody read today's Gazette, the article, Schenectady was a broom city?
Yeah.
I saw the
Sometimes,
picture.
you know, if you didn't read it, get the paper and check it out, because Mariaville, they did make the broom handles and stuff, so it all connected. Okay, I'm Leonard Van Buren. I was a fourth generation from Mariaville. When I was growing up, my first 12 years, my father worked in Amsterdam. So every other weekend he had off, and Sundays we would go to Mariaville, go up and down the road visiting with everybody, and Grandma would have a chicken dinner for us. And when I was 12 years old, we stayed the summer there. My father was between jobs, so that was the longest that I stayed there, with the feather beds, the bucket under the bed, because Grandpa didn't have indoor bathroom. He did not want. Until the day he died, we had the outhouse. But luckily, his outhouse was attached to the wood house, so we didn't have to go outside. Anyway, then after that, it was sporadic back and forth to Mariaville. Really, it was my father's home. I always wish he'd have bought Grandpa's house after he died, but he didn't do it. So anyway, Mariaville has changed, but still, there's a lot of memories there. If you'd like to say anything or add anything to the program tonight, don't be afraid, raise your hand and holler. I may have some errors, and if you'd like to add something to it, that's what this is about, you know. I'm not that old, but some of you might remember more than I do. Some of you have been there, you know, some of you have lived your whole life in Mariaville, like Punky. Punky always said that she was my cousin, and you'll find out later, yeah, she is my cousin.
She says she's everybody's cousin.
No. My mother was your father's cousin.
If we could keep Punky quiet tonight, we'll be okay. All right, the town of Duanesburg is made up of the 6 distinct settlements: Duanesburg, Quaker Street, Delanson, Eaton's Corners, Bremen's Corners, and Mariaville. Each has its unique and specialized history. For Mariaville, it is all about the lake, its mills, its camps, and tourism. Tonight's program also places my family in the midst of this history, the Van Burens and the Walpoles. Tonight's program is dedicated to George Lyon Peak, who wrote the books Thumbnail History of Mariaville and Duanesburg, Volume 1 in 1992 with a blue cover, and Volume 2 in 1994 with a yellow cover. The books were sponsored by the Mariaville Civic Association. George is my family. We called him Lion. I know my Uncle Bill used to call him Peaky, so I mean, we all have different names. He would come over to, George, as my family called him, he would come to our home, spend many hours talking to my dad, Ed and Delanson, talking to my dad, gathering information from my father about Mariaville. Lion would come over in the morning, talk with my father, who had a wonderful memory of Mariaville and ability to identify pictures. At noon, my mother would make them lunch, and they would continue on into the afternoon. Lion was a lifelong friend of my father's, was born in 1909, and my father in 1911, both in Mariaville. My father's memories that he wrote down or told me through the years contributed to this program. And go along with that, Volume 2 will be reprinted by the Mariaville Civic Association if there's enough interest. And we have a sign-up sheet over here at the table. If we get enough names, I'll give them to them. Maybe we can get that Volume 2 printed again, because that's a very, very interesting book. I got so much information from it. When Lion Peak died in 1995, my father's connection to Mariaville was gone. My father died in 1998. It all started with James Duane, the owner of 36,000 acres of land that became Duanesburg in 1765. The Mohawk Indians had known the place as Dismal Wilderness, named for packs of wolves, bears, wildcats, and other wild animals. Part of the wilderness was later named Mariaville in honor of Duane's firstborn daughter, Mariah, whose favorite drive was up to George Pheasant Hall's on Pheasant Hall Lake, about 2 miles south of Mariaville. As told by Abraham Eaton, grandfather of Andy and Joe Tinning, my grandfather, when a young man, mowed with a scythe some of the land where the present lake is. It was swampy land, he recalled. The water came from a creek leading from Pheasant Hall Lake. I used to swim across the lake when I was young and going through different temperatures of water. Pheasant Hall Lake covers approximately 60 acres and is said to be spring-fed. In 1793, James Duane constructed a 50-foot dam of boards across the creek where it is now at Batter Street, there by the store in Mariaville, backing up the water to what was called the Great Meadows, making a body of water called Mariaville Lake. Some called it the pond. The dam washed out the following spring, and Duane had it rebuilt. After 50 years of rebuilding the dam many times after spring freshets, the dam was rebuilt. He had it rebuilt. After 50 years of rebuilding the dam many times after spring freshets, George Lasher built a better dam to feed his sawmill located just below the dam, and later feeding other mills that were built on the creek. A concrete dam was built in 1927. This is a map of Mariaville. You see the pond, and here it goes down to the chucking on the creek. And I say the story, this is the first mill, Lasher's mill. Up at the top flat, our Walpole, that's Richard Walpole, where they first lived, my great-grandfather. And this is the road here, well, to the right goes to Amsterdam. Okay, now we've got 4 different pictures of the Peak store. You can see how they changed. This is 1907, 1914, 1917, and 1924. Again, note this boulder here on the left, down the corner. We'll get to that later. That's another story. The Mariaville Post Office was established in 1839 with many different postmasters serving until 1903, when it became a substation under the Delanson Post Office, which had 4 rural delivery routes, of which Mariaville was RD2. George Lasher Peak was appointed clerk in charge at that time, with a post office and a store, holding that position until his death in 1945, when his son George Lyon Peak took over. He operated the store and post office until 1971. The post office was closed in 1973, with Delanson serving the south side of the lake and Pattersonville serving the north of the lake and Batter Street. Lyon also served as Justice of the Peak for the town of Duanesburg from 1976 to 1987. And the store, thank God, is still going strong today after all these years. The Pheasant Hall Mansion, okay, let's read that first. It was built by James Frost in 1834, using reclaimed portions from the Pheasant Hall Mansion built in 1880. The Pheasant Hall Mansion burned in 1829. The Frost Mansion, owned by generations of the Frost Peak families. James Peak, great-great-great-granddaughter Janice Peak Black and her husband Bill are now living in and caring from the home. That's George Lyon on the left, and that's Marion on the right, probably 10, 12 years old. Oh, Jan Peak is here. Peak Black, I just call Jan Peak. Jan Peak Black is here tonight, so don't be afraid to holler, Jan, if I make mistakes. Okay, now we got some camps we found some old pictures of.
And picnic today.
All shapes, all sizes. And that was Frost Island.
Leonard,
Yep.
did you know that they used to charge a quarter every so many miles coming up from the city?
Oh, okay. Thank you. White Sweet Shop, Mariaville.
Where was that?
Just before the causeway going into the Schenectady on the right, I believe.
After the causeway going to Schenectady.
Between South
After
Shore
the
Road
causeway.
and Lake
After
Avenue.
the causeway going towards Schenectady? Okay, I thought it was this side. Okay, I wasn't there then.
Where South Shore Drive is.
Yeah.
You learn something every day.
Used to be a hotel over there that worked when I was a young kid. My mother and father went to the fire and I could sit home
This is
upstairs and watch it burn.
O'Brien's Tea Room.
Who's this?
Where was that?
Where was that then? I always thought these were about where Ferris's was in that area. but they're
That
not.
was on the corner. Kathy Hewitt owned that for a while, didn't you? Right on the corner?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
Corner
well,
of
the causeway or, okay.
West Road, the
West
corner,
Road, okay.
Causeway and West Road. Your brother lived there, John.
Mariaville Lake Regatta every year. The Civic Association has been active for, I guess, forever. I mean, this is 1921 they got, they're still going, they're active today. And it's shown, these are the events they had that day. And just think, which event would you folks want to join?
Address that,
Yes,
Lenny, Len,
Lenny.
I want to say,
Len, hey Len.
Yes, Jim.
My father's name is up there, and he told me a story that he ran into the store to tell his father that he had been in the swim race, and his father was all excited, and he said, "How'd you do?" And he said, "I came in third." He said, "How many were in the race?" 3.
Lenny, could you go back a slide to that menu? There was something, goats,
Yes, free eats.
soft codfish with goat's milk.
It was free except for mustard.
They didn't eat very good those days, I don't think.
Lenny? What was a 25-yard pig-headed race? I can't for the life of
A
me.
lot of people are big-headed, but
Notice that there's only boys in it.
Oh, that must be a misprint.
there's the Indian comes too.
okay, this is Connell's Bar. They were at the left-hand side of the Peak Store, a building off to the side. I just got this, oh, what year is old for me? 52, 53, is anybody? 52?
Gotta be.
Okay. I got this information from,
That was Golden Place.
the Cornells opened the bar there in the late 40s, living upstairs. In the early 50s, the outside window for ice cream was added. Young Dave, who I got the pictures from, him and his wife operated the Dom Gallo Florist on Broadway. He was from Mariaville. He gave me these pictures. He used to work for my Uncle Bill as a carpenter, and later he operated the florist shop in Schenectady. I always like to see Dave when he delivered flowers to our funeral home because he always liked to reminisce about the old days. And that's Dave's father and mother.
Relative on the wall.
It was said that Mariaville was 10 degrees colder because it was 1,100 feet above Schenectady. Mariaville was one of the most prosperous villages in Schenectady County, mostly because of Mariaville Lake. Many mills were built along the South Chuctanunda Creek flowing from the lake. Boating, swimming, and camping in the summer with hundreds of camps popping up and people taking in boarders. In the winter, the lake became the perfect setting for ice skating, ice boating, ice fishing, ice harvesting, and other winter activities. The summer people started to come about the time the road was resurfaced, 1910, 1911. Before that, they arrived by stage from Schenectady. Today, most of the camps have been replaced or updated with new camps or year-round homes. Well, previous to the road being paved, it was a plank road.
And this one, we were wondering about the lookout house, where it was.
Oh, I missed that. Does anybody know anything about this?
It was Salamax, that was the dance.
That was Salamax? Okay.
After looking and looking and looking, that's all I could figure
I
out.
mean, looking at that, Pat Dwyer shared this menu with us. Looking at that, wow, Mariaville was quite a place.
We can take a look at the prices here too.
That was when my mother lived there when she was younger.
Yeah, that was the dance hall. But look at the food.
And roller skating.
Yes, yep.
I love the prices.
Yeah, that was at Salamax dance hall before Salamax. They also had, I remember the building, a kind of built against a hill. It kind of, the front of the building, the porch was up high.
Yeah,
Yeah, I never was in it, I don't think.
there's a lot of
But
steps.
they had dance hall, roller skating,
Yep.
and then just before you, well, just to the left of that building over a ways was Ferris's Tavern.
Yes.
That was built in the late 40s. And I don't know what year it burned. Anybody know what year that burned? It was a brick building, wasn't it, if I remember right?
What was it?
Ferris.
Ferris's Tavern.
In the
became a brick
80s.
building after.
A few of the rival people used to stop there.
Hey, I wasn't here.
I was too young, so I'm out.
Late 90s, late 80s, John was in the fire department.
That was a busy place though. Years ago.
The Mariaville Breeze, that was printed on Saturdays during the summer. That was 5 cents a copy. And we've got them from, what, 4 or 5 years back they went? Short-lived. And some advertisements, Mariaville Ice, T.C. Swart.
Great uncle.
He was a big businessman in Mariaville. Elmer Smith Trucking,
He's a sword.
My brother.
Carl Joyce, I remember him being a carpenter. Dan Jeffers had the carpets in Pattersonville, and Buster McCone worked for him. He was my father's buddy. Yes, in the
I'm
back.
Andy Jennings. My grandfather, Abe Eaton, had 2 draft horses. In the wintertime, he would pull ice on Mariaville Lake that they would take to town to sell. But he had draft horses on the lake to pull ice out.
Didn't they store that ice in the T.C. Swartz barn?
Yes,
And they might have, yes.
There was a special ice barn for it.
A lot of ice houses too.
Oh, it was.
Those ice houses behind our
Sand in the, or straw.
One of the largest of the hamlets in the town of Duanesburg, which is very rich in history, is Mariaville. Since my roots are in Mariaville, I would start with my family ties. Recognize her, Mom?
My mother's mother.
You want to stand up here? We can, you know.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm so beautiful. Leave that, I'll tell you another one.
Through Punky, we got the picture and the information on,
I
Great.
got a picture of that home that my mother had.
okay,
It's
this,
her grandmother.
I always knew Van Buren was Dutch, and Seymour Van der Veen once told me that Van means from, so we were from Buren in Holland. My great-great-grandmother, Gertrude Wagner, this lady, who was married to my great-great-grandfather, Abram Van Buren, according to family tradition, and according to Punky, was a full-blooded Mohawk Indian belonging to the Turtle Clan. Deeds state that the island property, we saw the picture of the island before, was transferred from the Turtle Clan to Abram Van Buren's family. The Van Burens go back 3 generations to the early 1800s in Mariaville. Albert Sr., who as Bruce Martin called Pop Van Buren, moved his family from Niskayuna to a large farm just before the causeway on the Schenectady side of the lake. He later donated the land for the Catholic Church, St. Mary's of the Lake, which was built in 1935 and closed in 1979. Albert had 3 children. Albert Jr., which we called Uncle Bert, stayed on the farm until he died. Ada, who was Punky McCone's grandmother. When Punky says we are cousins, yes, she's right. I have to admit, after all these years. Everybody in Mariaville was related, though. It was Uncle Bert and, Aunt Mary and Aunt Grace and, well, let's call your father Uncle Dan. Remember?
Yeah.
He had the garage. So we were all family anyway.
Anyhow, they were all connected.
Lester, my grandfather, remembered the blizzard of '88. He left home at 12 years old and rented a room from T.C. Swart, a prominent businessman in hay and ice harvesting. At a young age, Lester worked at Dave Walpole's sawmill and only went to school in the winter. Nice way to do it.
That's Uncle Lester?
Now these are my grandparents, Lester and his wife Martha Walpole. Lester married Dave Walpole's
That's part of the Waddell family.
Lester married Dave Walpole's daughter Martha in 1910, and Lester converted Dave Walpole's old cheese factory, which we'll hit later, into a home. The 1986 building was originally a hotel, Love's Tavern. That was painted from an earlier photo we had, and we don't know where the photo is. We can't find it.
Where was that?
No.
Where was it located?
Right down past the firehouse going towards Route 30,
That's Ray's house.
McCone's garage, and right by, just before Kenny McCone's road on the right. The house is on the left. You wouldn't know, and it doesn't look anywhere near like it used to.
Oh,
Yeah.
Cheese factory.
that was also my family.
The teams drove under the portico to deliver milk. Inside were pipes to 2 large vats. Slow fires were kept under the vats to moderately heat and sour the milk. Mr. Eaton, again, wrote of slicing across the curd to release the whey, which was drawn off to the backyard where farmers came and got it to feed their hogs. At the back of the room, the cheese press formed the curd into wheels. It was cured upstairs on tiers of shelves where it was turned and rubbed daily. When it was Love's Tavern, down the back was David Berg's mill, which made broom handles. Here we go about the article today in the paper. For the important broom industry carried on near the broom cornfields in the Mohawk Valley. In 1875, Dave Walpole converted the tavern into the cheese factory, and then it became a home for Lester, Martha, and a family of 2 sons, Leonard W. Van Buren, my father, who became an undertaker, and William David. He had a nickname, Wee Wee. We don't know how we got that name, Wee Wee. Even Wee Wee. Uncle Bill was called Wee Wee.
Yeah.
How did you get it?
Which one?
Bill. Be nice
Uncle
now.
Bill, yeah. I don't know what it is.
But anyway, and my father called him Willie, so he had, a lot of names.
That's what my mother always called them, because they used to hang around together.
If Punky doesn't know why he got the nickname, I guess nobody does.
He had a lot of nerve asking Punky too.
She doesn't know where Punky came from.
It might surprise you. William was a self-employed carpenter. At one time or another, he worked on most of the camps in Mariaville. In the late 1940s, he purchased the former Wyckophite church, which had been turned into a home in 1915. It was kitty corner from his parents' home on the corner of Kenny McCone's Road. Pat, is there a name for that road?
That's next to Aunt Edna's place.
Yeah.
No, there's no, it was always this
You don't have, we call it Kenny McCone's Road. It's Kenny
Yeah.
up and down the road with his milk tanker.
Yeah.
He and his Uncle Bill and his wife Ruth had no children, so I'm the last branch of the family in the town of Duanesburg. Lester kept a horse, wagon, and sleigh and worked on state roads from Montgomery County line to Pheasant Hall Lake. When Republicans were in power, he had a man, Dave Peak, working for him. When the Democrats were in power, he worked for Dave Peak. See? Was my grandfather Republican or Democrat? Ice harvesting was big business in Mariaville. My grandfather and Dave Peak cut ice on the lake. Ice blocks weighed 150 pounds and sold for 10 cents each. They charged for delivery. Lester, my grandfather, received 2 cents each a cake. Dave Peak received 2, and Dave another 6 cents for the use of his horse and equipment. Ice was cut on the east side of Mariaville Causeway by Uncle Bert and his father Pops. They had their own ice equipment. Clyde Cullings and T.C. Swart were the big operators on the west side of the lake.
T.C. Swart was my great uncle.
Was it? Remember what the T stood for?
Tunis Cornelius.
Right, okay, that's it. I was going to ask that question, I didn't think about it. That's great, you got that. Ice was also cut on Pheasant Hall Lake. An ice cream company from Schenectady cut 10,000 cakes a day. My father was paid $2 a day using his father's 1921 Ford stake-bodied truck. 21 cakes a day, per trip, excuse me. Each cake weighed 150 pounds. He took them to farmers to use to cool their milk. Aunt Mary, my father's aunt, owned the Andua Inn. She would take 1/2 cake a day and it would last 3 days in the icebox. My father's Uncle Bill, I mean everybody worked in those days in Mariaville. He fell into the ice channel one time when they were harvesting. He was pulled out by Kermit Wood. He used a 16-foot pole with a hook on the end to hook on his jacket and pull him out. I guess that was a common occurrence. You go in the water and they pull you back out and dry you out. Lester later worked for the Schenectady County Home for 18 years and 7 years of maintenance before retiring. He had chickens with 3 large chicken houses that my father had built from salvaged lumber. My father was a great one for somebody wanted a camp or a building taken down, he'd salvage it and build something with it. His egg scale is on the table over here, and I guess they put the plastic eggs in the nest to get the hens to produce. He used to candle, and he used to candle his eggs in a cellar, which was always cool, using a light bulb inside a tin can with a round hole cut in the side. They said that was for checking for blood spots, I was told. And I remember spending a lot of time that hole in the cellar was damn bloody, sit by the hour candling legs. He also had a huge garden each year, giving away most of what he grew, mostly to the Mariaville Presbyterian Church, of which he was elder for many years. Lester was also tax collector for the town of Duanesburg in 1927. I've got the notice here in the table. We were able to salvage a few things through the years. My grandfather's first car was a 1904 touring car, purchased in 1916. The license plate, the license, and the receipt for buying the car are there on the table. I was looking through my father's box of stuff the other day. He's got receipts for my grandfather and my father from every car I guess they bought, receipts and invoices, and they were all Fords. His other cars were 1924, 31, 42, and 54, all Fords. In 1962, when he upgraded to his 54 Ford, he gave me his 1942. It was robin's egg blue, 2-door sedan. I lived in Lansing. I drove it around the railroad station parking lot one weekend. And the next weekend when I came home from Syracuse, was going to school, the car was gone. My father said he sold to Carl Tabor. Anybody remember Carl Tabor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
He sold it for $75, but he did give me the $75. I was upset. My grandmother took in boarders in the 20s and 30s since Mariaville Lake was a summer resort destination. So right to the day my grandfather died, part of the house was for tourists, which, you know, when they left, that was, it just stayed vacant. My father also worked for George, these are notes from my father, George Lasher Peak at the store. That's Lyons' father in the summers, 1921 to 31. What he told me, I've got it in notes, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for $7. He delivered the Gazette and Union Star to campers for 1 cent per paper. The customers paid 5 cents per paper. My father went to school at the one-room schoolhouse built in 1875 at the intersection of what is now Route 159 and 407, across from where George McCone used to live. If that means anything? I still go by the old names back in the 40s and 50s. I don't know any place now. He attended grades 1 through 8, losing a year of school because of heavy pneumonia. When he was not in school, the teacher said, "There must be a funeral today." He attended most funerals since he knew he wanted to be an undertaker since he was in 7th grade. The school burned in 1925 and grades 9 through 10 were at the Onondaga Inn. He attended Draper High School for grades 11 and 12 since they didn't have that in Mariaville. You had to provide your own transportation. He purchased a 25 Ford Model T Turkey Riders for 15 cents a trip. Doris and Frank Bradshaw, Gunnar Wistrom, and Ina Tulloch rode with him. He graduated from Draper High School in 1931, sold his chickens to his father, sold his car to his brother, and his dad drove him to Schenectady to get on a bus to go to Syracuse to attend Simmons School in bombing. The Mariaville Fire Company was formed in 1934, of which my father was a charter member. Their first fire truck was a 1929 Model T Ford purchased from Tribes Hill. Always busy, Mariaville continued on as an enterprising community. In 1893, Clarence Elva Cullings created and headed the Mariaville and Scout Schenectady Telephone Company, which is the first rural telephone company in Schenectady County. At its peak, the company had 1,400 poles in service. The company finally shut down in 1949 as a result of a terrible ice storm in January of that year that destroyed most of the line. Clyde Cullings, Nancy's brother, did a program on the phone company years ago, and also wrote some great articles for our Volume 2, which we have for sale, of our Historical Society. I didn't realize there were such good articles until after I had all this written, and I said, oh my God, I can't change everything. It was too late. But there's some great articles that we have in our volumes 1 through 4, but especially Volume 2 has got a lot on Mariaville. Okay, now we go to the Walpoles. My great-great-grandfather, Richard Walpole, was born in Ireland in 1802, immigrated to America in 1836. And going back, I jumped this line here. I was surprised when I researched my grandmother's maiden name, Walpole. I always kidded my wife, Pat, because she's Irish. I thought I was Dutch, but now I've got Dutch, or excuse me, Irish heritage also. That must be why we like to drink beer. My great-great-grandfather, Richard Walpole, was born in Ireland in 1802, immigrated to America in 1836. He settled as a farmer in Princetown. In 1844, he relocated to Mariaville, where he erected a sawmill. In 1845, he was listed as Justice of the Peace in the town of Duanesburg. In 1873, he sold his sawmill to his youngest son, David, my great-grandfather, and moved to Oswego, New York, where he died in 1881. My great-grandfather, David, born in 1845, had 5 children. James Mansfield, who died at 11 years old of appendicitis. Grace, who later married William Waddell, a well-known farmer in Mariaville and the Route 30 end of Mariaville. Mary, Aunt Mary, who later in life married Reverend Sam Noon, who was a minister in the Mariaville Presbyterian Church from 1920 to 1924. Martha, my grandmother, and Helen, who was a teacher in Mariaville, who died at the age of 22 years of age of tuberculosis. Dave Walpole was referred to as Squire Walpole. His first wife, Frances Lockwood, died in 1870. David's second wife and mother of his children was Julia Louise Dorn, 1852 to 1896. Their home by the side of the road was called Woodbine Lodge. In 1896, Julia was killed by a train at the Cobblestone Church crossing in Rotterdam. The trained horn spooked the horse, which jumped in front of the train. Julia was killed, and her daughter Grace, who was with her, at 11 years old, was thrown from the carriage and survived. And their horse continued on to their farm in Mariaville. It shows you how smart animals are. Squire David Walpole was Justice of the Peace in 1873 to 1909. It was said that he settled 9 out of 10 cases, talking to the accused, telling them to repent. With a clear head and a kind heart, he administered justice in this section for many years. Dave Walpole also owned 3 mills. A grist mill located to the left of the bridge going into Aunt Mary's Ondawa Inn. His buckwheat flour was in demand throughout the U.S. He used the ancient process, and the griddle cakes from his flour were served exclusively in the best hotels in the country. And there's a partial flour bag here on the table. It's all which we found in my grandmother's garret. You know what a garret is? It was her closet she had upstairs, and to me it was an attic, but she always called it the garret. But anyway, it's a shame after all these mills, all Dave did, and always got the little piece of a feed bag. I mean, it's sad. He also had a sawmill back at the cheese factory, cutting logs into lumber. And another sawmill with an upright saw was across from his home, which is farther down the creek, across from his house, making shingles, broom handles, stone boats, axe handles, wagon tongues, whiffle trees, swiggle trees, neck yokes, wheel fellies. Whiffle trees were also spelled whiffle, were pivoted crossbars to which harness traces are fastened for pulling carts, wagons, and so on. Swingle trees are similar to the whiffle trees. In the wheel fellies, also called wheel fellows, a circular rim or part of the rim of a wheel. Unfortunately, this is the only picture that we had of the sawmill. I say it's, and that was taken years after they shut down. Okay, this picture of the Walpole family in front of their home. Their home now, well, when I was young, it was sold to the Pangburn family. It's just down from Kenny McCone's house, 2 houses, and doesn't look like it used to. But anyway, well, there's another picture. We'll later show you how close to the road. My grandmother was on the bottom right here. We've got hundreds of those pictures. Okay, that picture shows down to the Walpole home, so the dirt road they lived on. Dave also made apple cider in season. He was known for his crab apple cider. He had his own crab apple orchard. Sold cider sold for 8 cents a gallon in barrels that were taken to Schenectady. That's another picture, shows you how close. They got 2 planks right to the road, so it's about that 8 feet. So they were pretty tight. My father said that the first telephone was a tin can in the Walpole home with a wire running to the cider mill, which was down across the road, down along the creek, which fastened to the can on the other end. They would tap on the can. I guess it worked, I don't know.
It works because I would make it work.
In order to conserve water, the downstream mills used second-hand water and were allowed to operate only when the grist mill was grinding. And in the spring of 1911, a flood called a freshet washed out all of the mills except the grist mill. Dave also had a 100-acre working farm, 3 cows and 3 horses. He had also bought the former Methodist Episcopal Church, which in 1860s was called the Society. Now that's going up towards the store, up out of Mariaville, on the right, probably a quarter of a mile before the store. There's a dirt road, I don't know what the name of the road is now. Okay, we drove in there a couple of weeks ago, and my God, you know, where was the on the end? There's houses, and it's changed.
They caught on fire and burned up.
That's where the hotel was too. The hotel was there
Yeah.
too.
The hotel was on the main road, wasn't it? Oh, hi, Bruce.
Right there, right where that church is.
Oh, okay.
It was all there.
He had bought the former Methodist Episcopal Church, which in the 1860s was called the Society, which had disbanded for lack of attendance around 1900. He had the seats in the pulpit taken out and made it into a hall called Walpole's Ballroom. They had Saturday night dances and other social affairs. My grandfather Van Buren played violin at the dances, and at 12 midnight they played Goodnight Ladies. In 1914, Dave Walpole's daughters, Mary and Grace, turned it into a boarding house called Ondawa Inn, where people stayed for a few days or weeks. In 1943, while Mary was baking, the inn burned to the ground. And the story is told by Gertrude Waddell's volume 2. It's in the book. The book is over here on the table. Okay, Dave Walpole died February 15, 1909 at the age of 63 as a result of injuries from a fall in one of his mills a month earlier. He is buried at Mariaville Cemetery with his 2 wives, his son James Mansfield, and his daughter Helen. The Mariaville Cemetery is another story to be told. I didn't put it in here, but the mills, they went to the 3 girls, my grandmother, Aunt Helen, and Mary. And somebody said, well, women don't know how to run mills. Anyway, the mills, they didn't function much after Dave died, and they split up the property. The Mariaville Cemetery, sometimes referred to as the Mariaville Presbyterian Cemetery, is located at the west end of Mariaville Lake, 2 acres of land on a peninsula of land jutting out into the lake from Batter Street. Early settlers are buried there: Frost, Marsh, Cullings, Lyon, Lasher, Waddell, Walpole, to name a few, along with 3 Civil War veterans: Henry P. McMaster, Nicholas Eaton, and Benjamin C. Wilkins. Now we come to this boulder. Remember the boulder that was in front of Peak Store way back? Okay. In 1929, Mariaville residents placed a large boulder in the village square, which was situated in front of Peak Store at the intersection of Batter Street and Route 59, as a memorial to the men who fought in World War I. A bronze tablet was installed on the face of the boulder on Saturday, August 28, 1920. The inscription reads, "In honor of First Class Private Raymond L. Boone, Machine Gun Company, 105th Infantry, 27th Division, USA, killed at the Battle of La Salle River Street, Souplet, France, October 20th, 1918, age 23. Erected by the citizens of Mariaville, New York, in a grateful recognition of the services to his country and humanity. This plaque includes honor roll names Robert E. Cullings, Stephen Brown, Orson J. Smith, and Frank Jeffers. The last 4 men were at the ceremony that hot Saturday afternoon, which the Gazette stated 500 people attended. In 1930, the state widened and resurfaced the road, removing the village square. The monument was moved to the Mariaville Presbyterian Church front lawn. In between 1971 and 1973, after the church was closed, the monument was moved to a prominent location in Mariaville Cemetery, where it should stay forever. The Mariaville Presbyterian Church was built in 1842. It was raised in 1917 to provide room for church-related activities, meetings, dinners, and so on in the lower portion. The church closed in the early 1970s and later was taken down. It was merged with a Scotch church, Presbyterian church, which later burned, and the Princetown Presbyterian church into a new Christ Church of the Hills in Rennie's Corners. The Princetown Presbyterian, I guess, is still up. Some group is taking care of the buildings. That's the main thing, they've kept the buildings. George Lyon Peak, with the assistance of Jeff Obrist, took it upon themselves to resurrect the cemetery in 1873. He arranged for the boys from Summit in June 1996 to trim the brush around the perimeter to make maintenance easier. After Lyon passed away in 1996, his daughter, Janice Peak Black, took it upon herself, along with her husband Bill, to continue her father's efforts to maintain the cemetery to the beautiful, peaceful place that it is today. The inmates returned in 2001 and 2008 to finish their work. Janet is now assisted by her brother Robert, and I started volunteering at the cemetery about 17 years ago when I realized that I had family buried there. We have most of the grave markers and monuments straightened up and secure. Bob Waddell has also done work at the cemetery with his tractor, cutting trees and repairing the perimeter fence. We have marked out burial plots for future burials. Jan Peak Black does a wonderful job volunteering her time and equipment. I mentioned that, volunteering her time and equipment to maintain and care for the cemetery. If you're ever in Mariaville, stop and see what a beautiful, peaceful, and historic place Mariaville Cemetery is. And thank the Peak family for their dedication to this piece of town history. That's the end.
We got one more photo.
Does anybody? Anybody just recognize this? This is only about, we taken 2 months ago.
Yeah, that's on 159, right across from Lever Road.
That's the ice cream place.
Yeah, he
Remember
said,
the name of the ice?
he said it's the ice cream.
Mariaville.
Love, Jimmy Love.
Jimmy Love. Remember the name? Name?
Jimmy Love. Huh?
Yeah, but the name of that ice cream.
Mariaville?
Oh, ice cream.
Mariaville?
No, that's on the South Shore.
Oh, that's right.
Old Orchard.
Old Orchard.
That's one thing I remember when I was a kid. I don't know why, but that was in the late 40s, early 50s, I believe, right? Okay.
This is Rose Ice Cream Stand.
Anybody got any questions or anything you want to add to this?
And our acknowledgements.
Oh, I want to thank these people, George Lyon Peak and my father. If they hadn't got together, we'd never had this book and probably never had a program. All I got is a pile of notes from my father, and one building, it was mentioned, was built in 1917, the other photo 1916, the other 1915. So, you know, sometimes, but anyway, thank God for those two guys getting together. Gertrude Waddell, this collection of the Mariaville Breeze, and Pat Dwyer was so generous loaning her collection from Mariaville. She's got a lot of valuable things from Mariaville. And Jan Peak, I've called her 3 times one day. Towards the end, see, I had this program done 3 years ago. We hit the virus, and then we put it away. So a month ago, I pulled it out, and as you can see, it's a lot of pencils, a lot of additions. So then I started looking at it real closely, and I, ooh. So 3 times yesterday, I called Jan with questions. And she bailed me out on that, because one, I thought, oh my God, it's going to be embarrassing. Anyway, I want to thank Jan. And my wife, Pat, she did all this work. I did all the paperwork, I made the notes, but she put it all together. Any of you folks, you know, write your memories down. You know, darn it, as I was doing this, my father had a wonderful memory. He was a funeral director. He remembered when anybody who died, he could tell you where they were buried. You know, this goes back to 1930, 31 when he started. But when you're young, you don't think to ask. Sometimes at Christmas, you sit down and make a few notes on things, but get information for your family. Write things down, because it's valuable. I mean, Because that, like our program, it's nice having get-togethers, but to have a local program of the town, places we know, people we've heard of. So, think about it. Scribble your
You got a
notes.
lot of people buried up in Mariaville, and you got a lot of people buried down in Minaville from Mariaville.
Yep.
And you got some off Schenectady, or South Schenectady, whatever you want to call it.
Yep, Jan.
I just wanted, you showed a lot about the buildings of Mariaville, but I want to do one little thing here about a little group of people, because I went through some of my photos too. I have a quilt here that is tied off. It's tied off. The quilt top was made by his grandmother, Martha. She made a lot of quilt tops, and my mother, who moved to Mariaville in 45, back in the 50s, she purchased a lot of those quilt tops. And the ladies' auxiliary of Mariaville would come to our house, and they would set up quilt bars on our ladder back chairs in the living room and lay out the 3 layers, and these little old ladies would come in and they would tie off these quilts. And it was, is it Clara Pangburn? Was that your name? Clara Pangburn was the one who sewed like an 1/8 of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch all the way around here with her sewing machine. But we have about 8 or 9 of Martha Van Buren's quilt tops. And I have a picture here that my grandmother's in, your grandmother's probably in here too, of a quilt. And on the back it said that this little postcard was from Mildred Thompson, and she wanted me to have it. And it says, thought I would let you, wait a minute, I can hardly read it. Thought I would let you see what our LA is doing. That would be the ladies' auxiliary. This was taken Saturday at our February meeting. We met at Mrs. Parent's, and she was the wife of the minister of the Presbyterian Church in Mariaville at the time. But my grandmother's in here, and his grandmother, I believe, is in here too. But I just wanted you to know, there's, the people, I mean, buildings are one thing, but the people there, they were quite busy, the little old ladies.
Our historical society has a new building up on Quaker Lane and Quaker Street. That's 4 years old, 2018. And we're collecting memorabilia, pictures, stories, whatever. So if you've got pictures and things, don't throw them out. Let us, if you want to keep them, we'll copy them and give you back the picture. Or if you're going to throw it out, give it to us. We want to save what we have. I mean, it's so much stuff has went over the bank. I remember where my grandfather lived, where the chicken coops were, and then went over the bank. We didn't have garbage men those days. They went down back, over the bank things went. Gosh darn it, it's a shame. But whatever, if you got something, give us a call. You come over, you can drop it off, we'll copy pictures, but we're trying to save what we can of the town of Duanesburg, the history.
I got a couple comments. About 30 years ago, I moved up to Mariaville from Rotterdam, and I live off of Reynolds Road. I bought an old farm from Caroline Cudis. And behind Caroline's old farm there was another farm, the Dougal Farm. And it had a waterfall on it. I don't know if anybody knows about Walker Falls. Okay, Walker Falls, on the top of the falls is, there's a lot of etched names of all the early settlers in Mariaville. And that started me on a journey of doing the research on the falls. And briefly, I could talk long, but briefly, the journey began with Corlear in 1641 when the Gruch-Valachi patent was issued, which ended up being the Great Flat patent. The Great Flat patent, and it's relevant because Mariaville shows up in a 1631 map of the Jesuits. And in the patent, it was 128 square miles. It was 16 miles from the bank of what was the fort in Schenectady, 16 miles west out the Mohawk River, and 8 miles wide, 4 miles to the north of the river, 4 miles to the south of the river. And in the 4 miles to the south of the river, in a lot of the reference books that I've been researching for the last 20 years, there were 5 Indian castles. 4 of them were on the Schoharie River. 1 was never discovered, but they talk about it in 1630 in a little village of Klein, which is now where Pattersonville is on 5S. But they reference the cascade at Carnay, which is, they feel that they found an old Indian village. They talk about it in Max's Reed's The Mohawk Valley in 1901. The book also talks about how they referenced the small pond in just south of this village of Carnay. So I just wanted to bring that up because there's a whole lot of history that predates James Duane when he bought all the land and divided it up. The house that I live in was I think number 163 on James Duane's patent. I own just under 500 acres on top of the mountain.
We got a place across from my house over the hill.
Yeah.
Indians used to be also.
So, I just wanted to, just let everybody know that, this history, I adore this early modern history that we have. But the history of Mariaville goes back to Native Americans in the elusive castle of Carnay, which is south of Klein, which is documented in the old book. So, just wanted to let you know that, back in the 1600s, they talked about corn pits and cascades, and up in the corn pits. The top of the mountain where I live is at 1,400 feet in elevation, and it goes down to the waterfalls, and the waterfalls got about over a 200-foot ravine that goes down into the waterfalls. And I'm sure a lot of the natives have been up there, maybe they've hunted up in there, down back in there. So just want to give you a little information on early Mariaville history.
One thing I've learned by doing this program, we talk about Duanesburg, Quaker Street, Delanson, the history. Mariaville, to me, is the place that's got the history. I mean, there was so much over in Mariaville. We can't forget it.
Did everybody sign the book?
Okay. We'll just have a short meeting. Want to thank Carl Whiteman for another interesting, informative newsletter, which was sent out in October. Thank you, Carl. Wherever you are, you're here someplace. Please keep your dues up to date so that we can continue to meet our mission of archiving and educating. Thank you to Audrey Rossi and Lorraine Oldhouse for providing tonight's refreshments. Next meeting is going to be Monday, November 21st, Nathan Fiddler in the Stone Walls by Albert Fiddler, Shirley Fiddler Martin, and Carol DeForest. Please sign the register before you go out and sit on the table. We have to keep track. We have to send reports to the state, and the bigger the number we have turnouts, the better we look for the state. Pat Paste had something he wanted to bring up. It's going to be quick.
Those of you who went on the barn tour last month, I had a couple of tools back here that were used to finish off the barn beams. I like to show anybody who was there. I'll sit back there after the meeting and talk.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Lenny.
Is there anything from the floor? Yes.
I have a question about your lecture. Is that me from the floor?
Yes.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Stand up. You mentioned when you were speaking, you mentioned the name Pangburn. And you mentioned Pangburn, and then you pointed to that gentleman over there. Are you Pangburn?
He's a grandson of.
Okay. Is that like Pangburn Road down to that?
I don't know. No, I don't think there's no.
Probably a distant relative, but it's
But
not.
I mean, it would tie in at some point. I mean, maybe
Probably.
Pangburn isn't like.
It's like our name is Kate. Rotterdam and Rotterdam Junction were full of
Oh, okay,
Kates.
all right.
But, we only know
Just
our
yeah,
line.
yeah. Okay, thank you. I thought maybe into the Newport Tanker Road or something, never know about stuff. Thank you.
Anything else?
I'd just like to make not a good announcement, but the other day we had a fire in Mariaville, and the firehouse, the house that caught on fire was a T.C. Swart homestead, the farmhouse. And that's gonna be torn down, it's a total loss.
That's where TC lived?
Pardon?
That's where TC lived?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I'd like to ask anybody, because I don't have any pictures or memorabilia of the Swart family, so if anybody has anything on the Swart family, if you could come up with pictures or, items mentioning the Swarts. I saw some documents up there where the Swart
Are
family
you
was
a
mentioned.
relative?
Yes, T.C. Swart, Tunis Cornelius Swart, was the man that ran the operation of the ice program up at Mariaville, cutting the ice. And that was and my dad he would have been my great uncle. So, my great uncle, and my last living uncle just passed away in 2017. But again, he had no pictures, no, memorabilia at all of the family. So,
I might have some home.
it's possible. You're related to everybody.
Good to see everybody tonight. Enjoy the refreshments and hope to see you next month.
Thank you.
Excellent.